I'm Harper, co-founder of a tech company based in Austin, Texas. 8 years ago, my husband Mason and I started everything in a tiny garage with just 2 laptops, 1 whiteboard, and countless sleepless nights. We used to be the most in-sync team I'd ever known. I handled strategy, he pitched to investors. I gave the presentations, he sat beside me, his eyes filled with pride. Back then, at any industry event, Mason would hold my hand and tell people, "This is Harper, the reason this company exists." He meant it, and I believed no matter what storms came, we would always stand side by side. But what I didn't know was this: the quietest storms often begin in the eyes of the one who once called you my lifelong partner. When the company started to grow beyond our expectations, 3 offices, over 200 employees, a wildly successful Series C funding round, I began to notice something shifting. Not in our revenue or reports, but in the way Mason looked at me during meetings. A quick, cold glance, as if I were no longer his partner, but an assistant assigned to the light work. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself he was just stressed. But then my seat in the boardroom was moved, from beside him to the far end of the table, closer to the door. I stopped receiving early drafts before meetings. Once, Mason's assistant even asked me, "Miss Harper, would you like to help prepare coffee for the leadership team today?" I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that catches in your throat. This was the room I designed, the flooring I chose, tile by tile. The logo on the wall I collaborated with the designer to create. And now, I was being told to keep the sugar low and the coffee cups from overfilling. I remember clearly the day Mason walked into the boardroom, glanced at me sitting quietly in the corner, and said, "Harper, can you print the appendix for the extended strategy session this afternoon?" "I need it ready." No eye contact. "No thanks." I nodded, gripping my pen so hard it nearly snapped. That appendix, I'd written it over the past 3 weeks. Every number, every model, it was mine, but Mason's name was on the cover. I didn't speak, not because I was weak, but because I was watching. When a wolf is cornered, it doesn't howl. It waits. Each night I sat in a small office at the end of the hallway, once a file room, now labeled my flex workspace, and studied the game Mason was building. He had grown used to the spotlight, while I had been reduced to a shadow. But what he forgot was this: I built the stage. And if needed, I could bring down the curtain too. In meetings, I didn't argue, I just took notes. I didn't correct him when he repeated data I'd sent him 3 weeks earlier, claiming it as his own. I looked up for a moment, then quietly returned to my notepad. I used to trust without hesitation. But trust is like glass. Once broken, the cuts go deep. And I knew the worst part hadn't even begun. I started noticing Mason's shift about 4 months ago, right after the company signed a major strategic deal with a partner in Vancouver. It should have been a milestone we celebrated together, like we always had. But that day, he simply nodded coldly as I walked into the room. No celebratory dinner, no tight hug. He packed up his materials and told the team, "I've got a red-eye flight. Celebrate without me." He didn't even glance at me. At first I told myself it was pressure. Big contracts, endless pitches, constant travel. But over time that excuse wore thin. Mason began coming home later and later. Some nights I stayed up until nearly 1 a.m. just to hear the door open, his footsteps dragging wearily into the bathroom. He no longer lay next to me. He stopped sharing the little details of his day. Even our 10th wedding anniversary, I'd prepared a quiet dinner in our backyard, but he didn't come. "Sorry, got held up in New York, the client rescheduled," he texted, at 8 p.m. I stared at the cold food on the table, then at the text. No question, no promise. Just a detached notification he wasn't coming. I began noticing his last-minute business trips, vague texts, urgent internal calls on weekends. One day, Mason left his iPad on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, intending only to hand it over, when the screen lit up. Same room as before. "Bring the red dress." "I've ordered the champagne." 2 whole days with no one around. I froze by the sink, hand tightening on the counter. No name. Just an unfamiliar number. But the message cut straight through me. I quickly opened our shared calendar, a system we had synced for years to manage our travel. There it was, a hotel reservation. The Lorette Signature Suite, 2 nights, starting September 17th. My birthday. I skimmed through his synced email. Also connected to receive billing confirmations. Booking confirmation, Mr. Mason Blake and guest. I stopped myself from feeling anything. The betrayal wasn't just infidelity, it was being erased even from the lie. No message about making an excuse, no concern over covering his tracks. Not even the decency to mention my name. I opened the backup text app we had installed years ago for international travel. Scrolling past work chatter, I found threads that made my stomach turn. It's booked. Lakeview. Your favorite room. The window still has your little drawing. No laptop. I want all of you. I'll be your first birthday present. I didn't blink. I copied everything. Every word, every image. Stored them in a new folder on my personal laptop. I labeled it plainly, 17th. I needed to confirm who she was. A new hire had just transferred to headquarters. Lana Monroe, a creative director from San Francisco. Tall, golden waves, amber eyes, and a voice as sharp as a scalpel. I had sensed something, the way Mason's expression softened each time she passed by, but I hadn't wanted to believe. I opened Lana's public Instagram account, full of events, designer brands, and a Milan business trip from last month. One photo from a gala showed Mason behind her, his hand placed lower on her back than professionalism would allow. Another image, the red dress, the kind no man forgets once he's seen it. I'd worn a red dress the night Mason proposed. He once told me, "All I remember is you, and that color." Now that color belonged to someone else. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. No tears, no screaming, just a sharp, icy stillness spreading through my chest. Mason had played a game of chess. He thought I was standing outside the board, but I had stepped in long ago. I just hadn't made my first move yet. I opened my laptop, transferred every piece of evidence to an encrypted hard drive. Then I cleared my calendar for my own birthday, not to cry, not to reconcile, but to rebuild the entire stage and invite Mason to its final curtain call. Maybe that's just my way. As a woman who spent nearly a decade mapping growth strategies, forecasting markets, and managing crises. The only difference this time? I wasn't fixing a failed deal. I was confronting the man who once shared my bed. I started with what I knew best. Evidence. Screenshots from the iPad, hotel bookings, text messages, Lana's Instagram photos. I compiled everything into a secure folder, password protected, with the date Mason forgot our first anniversary. But the personal wasn't enough. I needed leverage to flip the board. For the past year, I'd noticed irregular payments in the financial statements. Strategic consulting, fees under marketing, no clear vendor names, no listed representatives. When I asked Mason, back then, he waved it off. Lana's team handles it. Nothing major, don't worry. This time, I worried. And when I traced each invoice, each payment, each receiving account, everything became terrifyingly clear. 3 companies, VantageCore, PulseView, and Nexapoint. Different names, different logos, but every invoice came from the same IP address. Identical fonts, identical formatting down to the punctuation marks. Every payment approved by Lana, signed by Mason. I hired Jordan Wells, a digital forensics expert I'd worked with during the 2020 data breach. Within less than a week, Jordan confirmed it. All 3 consulting firms were shell entities, registered in Nevada under the same legal address, a commercial mailbox service. Jordan traced the funds, all consolidated into one account in Belize. Primary beneficiary? A trust under the name LM Holdings. That was all I needed to know. Total siphoned over the past 8 months, more than $480,000, a figure big enough to shake the board but not enough unless I played the next steps flawlessly. I needed someone on the outside, someone with both position and motive. I thought immediately of Raymond Adler, a strategic investor from Minnesota, who had poured nearly $3 million into our Series B. Mason openly disliked Raymond for asking difficult questions and refusing to be manipulated. I, on the other hand, knew that Raymond valued true builders. I used a personal, unsynced phone to call. Raymond, I need to meet. Not as CEO, but as co-founder. And as a betrayed woman. 5 seconds of silence. Then, I'll fly to Austin tomorrow morning. We met at a small coffee shop in an old warehouse district, somewhere no one from the company would stumble into. Raymond arrived early, still wearing his signature silver-gray suit and unreadable stare. But this time, he didn't interrupt me like in board meetings. He sat, listened, and reviewed each piece of evidence I laid out. When I showed him the shell companies, he simply nodded. I suspected something was off, but I didn't think Lana and Mason would be that reckless. Can you help me? I asked directly. What do you need? An independent auditor with enough credibility that the board can't dismiss it, and a vote if we move to replace the CEO. Raymond smiled. You don't have to ask twice. Mason forgot who kept this funding flowing. We began coordinating. Raymond sent in his audit team under the guise of a routine pre-IPO financial check, a perfectly legal excuse to keep things discreet. Meanwhile, I started rewriting sections of the corporate bylaws, knowing most board members hadn't read past page 3 in years. I inserted a new clause under ethics violations. If the chief executive officer is found to be involved in financial misconduct or serious conflicts of interest, the chair of the board may initiate an immediate suspension without requiring a full board vote. One line. A dagger buried in an 18-page policy document. I printed the revised bylaws and slipped them into Mason's stack of compliance papers, documents he needed to sign ahead of strategic announcement week. I placed them on his desk early Monday morning with a familiar note. Please sign before 10 a.m. for legal team review. Mason picked up the pen without reading more than 3 seconds. You've always been good at the boring stuff, he muttered, flipping through the pages and signing without pause. I smiled faintly, not out of joy, but because I knew he had just signed the key to his own downfall. The plan was in motion, and I was the only one at the wheel. I booked a room at Rosedale Private Suites, a boutique hotel in Austin's West End, not because it was the fanciest, but because it was the place Mason once took me during our second year together, surprising me with a birthday dinner and saying, "Every year I'll bring you back here, just the two of us." We never went back. Maybe he forgot. I didn't. And I chose that very place, Skyline Suite, 9th floor, to rewrite the script for my 39th birthday. In a way no one in the room next door could ever anticipate. I booked the room 2 days before Mason and Lana's reservation, same floor. Room 901, right next to 903, the one he reserved, along with a special note for the hotel. Please prepare champagne and roses upon arrival. The front desk recognized me the moment I walked in. Mrs. Blake, it's been a while. I came back just in time, I smiled. And I have a small request. I handed her a card with my private number and a simple instruction. Please notify me when the guests in room 903 check in. The receptionist looked up, momentarily surprised, but nodded without hesitation. I stepped into room 901 and began staging the scene. The room was modern, done in neutral tones. I rearranged the armchairs and angled the coffee table toward the door, just enough so everything inside could be seen through a barely open crack. I placed 2 crystal flutes beside a chilled bottle of Moët and Chandon, perfectly beaded with cold condensation. On the table, I laid everything out. Bank statements, falsified invoices, screenshots of the Belize account, the money trail flowing through shell companies. Each item placed like part of a quiet performance, not too showy, subtle enough to catch the eye of anyone who happened to glance over. Adjusted the lighting, floor lamps set low, wall sconces casting a warm golden hue. Playing softly through the speakers was an instrumental piano track one Mason had used in our first company promo video, a piece of the past he tried to erase. I turned it into the sharpest blade. I wore a simple black dress with a square neckline and cool silk fabric, minimal makeup, hair pinned high, not to allure, but to appear unshaken. At 7:08 p.m. I received a message from the front desk. Room 903 has checked in, the woman is on her way up from the bar. I replied with a single word, thanks. 3 minutes later, a soft knock at my door. I opened it. Raymond Adler stood there, carrying a black leather case, wearing the expression of a man walking into a strategy summit, not a personal ambush. You ready? Yes. Are you? I've been waiting for this day longer than you know. Raymond placed the case on the table and pulled out a thick, sealed folder. Inside, legal findings from the audit team, the amended bylaws Mason had signed without reading, and a summons for an emergency board meeting Monday morning. I've secured the votes. 4 members are on standby. We just need formal approval after the meeting. Good, I said, fingers brushing the rim of my untouched champagne. But tonight isn't about signatures. It's about watching him fall. At 7:22 p.m., the soft click of heels echoed down the hallway. I didn't need a peephole. Lana Monroe. I opened the door just enough to let the room's light spill out to cast an image of me, seated calmly next to the man who had long haunted Mason's financial ambitions, in a space that looked freshly cleared from a clandestine negotiation. Raymond sat across from me, hand resting lightly on the open folder. I heard the soft creak of room 903's door. Mason's voice, low. Wait until you see the balcony, you won't want to leave. Then Lana's quiet laugh. And then, silence. Before their door even shut, Mason's gaze caught the light spilling from room 901. My room. He froze in the hardwood hallway just feet away. Lana stiffened beside him, her fingers tightening instinctively on his arm. I didn't move. Raymond didn't look up, still calmly flipping a page in the binder, like reviewing the final clause in a billion-dollar contract. Mason took a hesitant step forward. Harper. What is this? His voice was gravel, strained, barely masking panic. I looked at him, slowly raised my glass. Happy birthday to me, I smiled, light but laced with steel. Lana let out a shaky breath. Mason stood paralyzed, his face drained like the blood had abandoned him in seconds. Raymond, Mason tried to recover. I didn't expect. Raymond cut him off, eyes still down. We need you at tomorrow morning's board meeting. It starts at 8 sharp, don't be late. It hit like a verdict. Lana glanced at Mason, searching his face, but he avoided her eyes. I rose, champagne in hand, and walked to the threshold, just 1 arm's length from Mason. I don't need to ask how many lies you told, I said, voice low and even. I've read them all. Mason opened his mouth, shook his head. Harper, No, I stopped him. There's no us. No we. All you need to do now is read every line in that binder. Or don't, as usual. I'll explain it all to the board. Lana began to speak, but I glanced her way. She fell silent. My stare wasn't angry, it was cold, detached. The kind that tells someone their presence has been erased from your world entirely. Raymond stepped forward, picking up the binder. We won't make a scene, he said. This will proceed according to protocol and bylaws. But Mason, I suggest you remain silent from this moment on. Mason looked at me, confusion bleeding into rage and finally into unmistakable fear. What do you want, Harper? He asked, nearly whispering. To destroy me? I shook my head. No. I want you to understand what it feels like to be sidelined in the world you helped build, to be seen as a hollow figure, no voice, no power, no trust. Not destroyed, just replaced. Lana took a step back. Her hand slipped from Mason's arm. She looked between us, then turned and left without a word. Raymond gave a slight nod. We're done here. I looked at Mason one last time. I'm not locking the door. If you want to understand what's coming, step inside and read. And I closed the door, gently like ending a dull meeting. Inside, the light stayed warm. The music kept playing, just a simple, persistent piano, like the heartbeat of someone who had let go of anger and kept only the clarity of precision. Raymond sat back down, took a slow sip of champagne. You did better than I expected. I sat across from him. I didn't do it for your expectations. We sat in silence, listening to Mason's footsteps returning to room 903, followed by the sound of the door slamming shut. I knew he wouldn't sleep tonight. As for me, I would sleep deeply, because tomorrow, I no longer needed to fight. The next morning I arrived at headquarters at 7:30 a.m. exactly 30 minutes before the emergency board meeting. I wore a charcoal gray suit, sharp lapels, a delicate pearl necklace, a silent signal that I came as a leader, not a betrayed wife. No one said a word as I walked through the 12th floor corridor, but I saw the quick glances, the immediate turnaways, not out of awkwardness, but because they knew something big was coming. The boardroom was brightly lit, the screen already on. Raymond stood by the table, talking with veteran board members Allison Burke and Dean Morales. They nodded when they saw me, not with polite smiles but with quiet respect. At 7:58, everyone was in position. Everyone except Mason. 1 minute later, the door burst open. He walked in, pale, unshaven, collar wrinkled. A stark contrast to the man who used to stride into this room like the world revolved around him. No one stood. No one offered coffee. He took the CEO chair, the one I had chosen, and sat in silence. At 8 o'clock sharp, Raymond stood and placed a file in front of each member. Thank you all for coming. We'll begin with a matter not originally on the agenda, an urgent issue involving financial governance and executive ethics. I stood immediately, no introduction needed. In the past 8 months, the company has spent over $480,000 on 3 strategic service vendors: VantageCore, PulseView, and NexaPoint. However, following an independent audit, we've confirmed that these are shell companies, with no actual staff, no operating addresses, and all payments routed through intermediaries to a personal trust fund. I clicked the remote. The screen displayed invoices, wire paths, a cross-border transaction map. No one interrupted. All payment files were signed by the Chief Marketing Officer Lana Monroe, and final approvals came from the acting CEO Mason Blake. At this point, Mason leaned forward, voice hoarse. "Harper, you're trying to frame me." Raymond raised his hand. "No interruptions." Mason slumped back, his body rigid. I opened a prepared folder. According to Clause 4.2b, added in the latest governance charter, if the CEO is found to have committed severe financial misconduct, the board has authority to suspend them immediately without a full vote, provided the violation is confirmed by independent audit. Raymond nodded and added, "The auditors have validated the transactions and confirmed the breach. The documentation has been notarized with signatures from 3 separate independent audit firms." I didn't look at Mason. I looked at each board member. "You're welcome to review all files here, but if you need a quick question, is anyone denying that this company has been drained through a fraudulent system created by 2 executive officers?" Silence. Not even a rustle of paper. Dean, typically the most neutral, spoke first. "I support immediate suspension." Allison followed. "Agreed." Last was Mark Dunley, who had doubted me from day one. He looked at Mason, then me, and nodded. "The time has come." Raymond finalized it. Per our new charter, Mason Blake is hereby suspended from all executive functions, effective immediately. All access rights and system privileges will be revoked within 30 minutes. Mason didn't rise. Didn't argue. He just stared down at his palms, like searching for a piece of lost power. I gathered my document. Temporarily, I will assume operational leadership to ensure the next audit phase proceeds without delay. Any legal actions will be decided at next week's meeting. The meeting ended in silence, not tense, but the kind of calm after a storm, as a new order settles in. I walked out, hearing Mason's slow footsteps dragging behind me. As I entered the elevator, he stopped at the doorway but didn't get in. "Harper," he whispered, breathless. "Do you not recognize me anymore?" I looked at him. "No. But you stopped recognizing me long before I vanished from your sight." The elevator doors closed. Upstairs, the CEO office was already open, waiting. I didn't need anyone to hand the seat back to me, because truthfully I had never left. I had only waited for the right moment to return, and this time, I wouldn't be behind the curtain. 3 days after the board meeting, Lana Monroe submitted her resignation via a 3-large email to HR. No apology, no explanation, no farewell call. Just a cold subject line, effective immediately. Her departure was not publicly announced. I didn't see the point. Those smart enough already understood what had happened. The rest didn't matter. A week later, Mason sent his first email from a personal account. His tone confused, softened, even tinged with regret. I just want to see you for a moment, not about the company, I just need to know what's still left between us. I didn't respond. The next day, Jeanette Blake, his mother, showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant looked uneasy as she led her in, but I simply nodded. She sat across from me, her silver hair neatly curled, her aged eyes still sharp. She was the same woman who made me clear the dinner table the first time I visited their home, the one who once called me too ambitious to be a wife. Harper? She began calmly. I'm not here to defend him. I just want to ask. How far are you planning to take this? I looked at her without smiling. I'm not taking it anywhere. Mason walked himself there. She paused. He's falling apart. He can't sleep. He said, he never thought you'd be this cold. I closed the file on my desk and met her eyes. You know, I used to think people betrayed out of weakness, but now I understand. Some betray because they believe they'll never be held accountable. She said nothing more, but before standing up she gave a slow nod, as if finally seeing what her son never did. Who truly built this empire? 3 months later, we announced a full restructuring of the marketing and legal departments. Everyone Mason had hired for loyalty quietly stepped down. I replaced them with people who had real talent, including a few familiar faces who had once been sidelined. Revenue rose 13% in the first quarter alone. A project Mason had shelved as not profitable enough was revived with a more sustainable and transparent plan. I didn't send out grand press releases. I didn't appear on talk shows with some overcoming adversity story. I let the numbers and the silence speak for me. Inside the company, things changed. Meetings were no longer monologues. Employees spoke up more. The creative team submitted twice as many proposals each month. The customer care unit, once gutted under Mason, now had its own dedicated office and a weekly feedback program. I didn't need to make a statement, but I did change a few things. The nameplate on the CEO's office door now read, Harper Blake, co-founder and chief executive officer. No bold font, no spotlight, but no confusion either. The painting Mason had hung behind the desk, an image of his favorite skyscraper, was replaced with a map marking the first 5 cities where I personally signed expansion deals. Mason no longer made public appearances. Some said he had moved to the suburbs with his sister. A few emails from his legal team, asking for a review of the suspension terms, were handled swiftly and lawfully by our legal department. I never issued a rebuttal. I never wanted to destroy him, I just wanted to rebuild the company he thought he could separate me from, and prove that no one can take away something you built with your youth and your life's work, unless you allow them to. One night near the end of the year, Raymond dropped by my office with a bottle of that old red wine, the same kind we opened after closing our first Canadian deal. He didn't say much, just set a small card on the table. Thank you for reminding me why I invested in this company. It wasn't the numbers, it was the person sitting here. I said nothing, just poured 2 glasses. We clinked our glasses in silence. No victory toast, no prideful speeches, only quiet resolve. I was back, not to claim something, but to remind them I never left. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring order. In a world where women are too often pushed backstage, I chose to step forward, not with anger, but with competence, strategy, and poise. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I only had to show that silence can be powerful when used wisely. And sometimes, the smartest way to win isn't to bring others down, but to rebuild the empire they thought was theirs to keep. What do you think of Harper's choice? Was it strength or too much coldness? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about marriage, family, and unexpected turnarounds.